Dear reader, I'm Tony, and this is Book Text. I'm continuing our lecture series on the life of books. Today's topic is on how we personify books. But first, our word of the day today is the word antelucan. Antelucan, it's an adjective, and it refers to the time before dawn. So things that happen right before dawn. So my morning walk is an antelucan walk. All right, so I wanted to continue our discussion on books as objects and talk about how we endow those objects with person traits, people traits, human traits. Even in the last Life of Books video, I talked about books as companions. Right? Books accompany us through certain parts of our lives. Walter Benjamin, a German Jewish philosopher and writer, wrote about the Latin phrase habente sua fata libelli, which means books have their fates. This is what he said. One of the finest moments of a collector is the moment when he rescued a book to which he might never have given a thought, much less a wishful look, because he found it lonely and abandoned on the marketplace and bought it to give it its freedom. Objects don't express emotions like loneliness, and they certainly can't feel abstract concepts like freedom, or they can't have fate, they can't experience abandonment unless we personify them. Here are some ways that we personify books. The way that we talk about them as books speaking to us, books teaching us, books challenging us, books meandering, right? We can't follow the plot because the book meanders. There's lots of ways that in our language we speak of books as if they were people. I recently read a hilarious book called Dear Fahrenheit 451 by Annie Spence. She is a librarian, and she is writing 2 books in this story. So each segment is a letter to a book she found on the stacks at her library, and she's writing to it as if it were a friend or an ex-lover or a raving lunatic. And I thought this practice was so charming and so fun that I want to write all of my Goodreads reviews as letters to the books that I read, because I love the idea of personifying the books in this way. And you know, you do feel sometimes like you develop a relationship with a book, that it becomes a lover or a friend or an enemy or someone that you know, that annoys you. But I loved that idea, and I want to explore that myself a little bit further. So I want to practice what Annie Spence does in this book, writing letters to books. I once had a relationship with a book in college. So I was an editing minor, which means I took a lot of editing classes, copy editing, content editing, all sorts of things. Substantive editing, I guess is what it's called. And for several years in college, I had to carry every day this massive, bright, heinously orange book, The Chicago Manual of Style. I shall insert a picture right here because I don't have my copy with me. It's in my office at the university, because I still refer to it every once in a while. But as students, we were always referring to that thing, so we always had to have it with us. It was heavy. That picture does not do it justice. It's thick, it's heavy, hefty, and so we started talking, because most of my classmates were women. We were talking about Chicago as if Chicago was our boyfriend. And we would spend all of our time with Chicago. Chicago would go everywhere with us. Chicago would end up at a restaurant because we were studying while we were waiting for our food. Or Chicago would be there while we fell asleep while we were studying. I had one friend who was highlighting in a textbook, fell asleep on it, and then when she woke up, she had a smear of highlighter, fresh highlighter that had gotten onto her cheek that she didn't notice, of course, until she got home and someone told her. But you know, you are there with that book so much. You have it in such close physical distance, all the time, you start to feel a connection to it, feel like you have a relationship with it. And many of my friends have since dumped Chicago, and Chicago and I have taken, we've seen other people, I've seen other books since then, but he still has a nice place in my office on campus where I refer to him sometimes if I need to figure out how to punctuate a range of numbers or how to hyphenate compound words. I'll flip open, especially when I'm helping my students, we'll pull out my ex-boyfriend, Chicago. I think I've mentioned this before, but I also volunteer as a mending assistant in the local library. And so we have kind of a mending and repair office upstairs in the back area of the library, and books come to us. That's where we process the books originally, so we put the book jackets on, and we put the right stamps on and add the RFID and all sorts of things. But we also will get books that have tears or water damage, or the spine is falling off, the glue is coming undone of all sorts of reasons why books come to us, and we repair them very carefully. I was actually trained by an art history preservation expert, and so we take our books seriously. And to emphasize that point, I've heard many a mending librarian talk about books as if they were people. So I remember the very first time that I found tape in a book. Hint, never put tape in a library book. For whatever reason, we're not allowed to keep circulating that book. I think it's maybe encourages people to put tape in the books, and it starts to ruin the books. But this, there was a nice tear in a picture book, and some well-meaning person had put Scotch tape over the tear on both sides, and it's hard to remove that tape without further damaging the page. And so I wasn't sure what to do with this tape the first time I found it. And so I called over one of the librarians, and she goes, "Oh, it's dead." And I thought, pardon, what? But we called the books that we can no longer circulate, we called them dead books. And I thought, ooh, that's a little dramatic, but I've worked there for several years now, and I really feel it, that those books, they're people, and they're your patients. We think of ourselves sometimes as surgeons. I remember having a really long tear, and I wasn't quite sure how to mend it. One of the other librarians said, "Oh, well, first we have to stabilize the patient." And so she showed me a couple techniques for stabilizing the page so that while parts of it were drying, while I was mending it, the rest stayed in place. So we do talk about our books as if they were people in the library. So obviously this is not an exhaustive discussion on how we personify books, but I'd love to know how you personify your books, or if you've heard of other kind of strange ways that we treat our books as if they were people. Please leave some comments below. I'll be back for another video in a week. Remember, there's always another book.